Across much of Scotland, there will be plenty of fine weather to end the day, but it's cloudier across the Northern Isles, though even here it's going to stay dry. There will be plenty of sunshine for Northern Ireland this evening, and that is the theme we will stick with for the next few days, staying warm by day but chilly overnight. Tomorrow, thick cloud will feed in from the east overnight, but sticking with clear skies further west, meaning it will turn chilly, and that's how your weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
So good afternoon, hello and welcome. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua, and for the next 2 hours, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics that are hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. So joining me today, it's co-founder of Conservatives Against Racism, Albi Amankona, and also former Labour advisor Scarlett Maguire. Before we get started, let's get your latest news headlines.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's 4 o'clock. I'm Miranda Shunker in the GB newsroom. The mayor of Ukraine's capital, Vitaly Klitschko, and his brother Vladimir are warning the world is at risk if Russia targets Ukraine's nuclear plants. In an interview with GB News, the Klitschko brothers said they're grateful to Britain and the US for the support they've received, but it's just not enough. They accused Russia of consistent lies and said they can't be trusted in peace talks.
We've got 4 nuclear power plants. One of them was on fire. Over 1,000 rockets, up to 2,000 rockets were launched and landed on Ukrainian soil. There is no guarantee that one of those rockets not just going to kill civilians, but going to hit this or those power plants. And if that's going to be targeted and eventually exploded, the world is going to face Chernobyl and Fukushima in multiple times.
Russian forces have taken control of a town in Ukraine where workers at the Chernobyl nuclear plant live. The governor of the Kiev region has said protests in the centre of town have been targeted by Russian fire and stun grenades. 3 powerful explosions have been heard near Ukraine's western city of Lviv. Black smoke was seen rising from the northeastern side of the city. In an online post, the region's governor urged residents to take shelter. Meanwhile, the US president says he isn't confident Russia has changed strategy in Ukraine and has labelled Vladimir Putin a butcher. It's after Russia claimed it's moving its focus to the eastern region of Donbass. Joe Biden is in Warsaw meeting Ukrainian refugees and the city's mayor to discuss the humanitarian response to the war. Earlier, he held talks with his Polish counterpart, President Duda.
The single most important criteria in this time of a changing world, so much is changing, not just here, but in other parts of the world, is that NATO stay absolutely, completely, thoroughly united.
The Mayor of London is taking part in a solidarity march in the capital to send a unified message of support to the people of Ukraine. Sadiq Khan said the UK should be doing much more to aid Ukrainian refugees. 150,000 families in the UK have now stepped forward as part of the Homes for Ukraine scheme, with 20,000 visas already granted.
Londoners over the last few weeks have shown that we're opening our arms to Ukrainian refugees, whether it's by donating money to those charities doing a brilliant job in Ukraine and just outside Ukraine, or whether by opening our homes to those fleeing Ukraine. It is important that over the next few days and weeks we make it far, far easier, much more easier for those who are fleeing Ukraine to come here.
Well, in other news, protests are taking place at UK ports over the sacking of hundreds of P&O Ferries staff as calls grow for the company's boss to quit.
What do we want? Censorship! When do we want it?
A P&O ferry has also been held in Northern Ireland for being unfit to sail due to failures over vessel documents and crew training. The operator replaced 800 seafarers with agency staff on cheaper salaries just days ago. Well, our East Midlands reporter spoke to Steve Doran, national organiser of Nautilus International, at a protest in Liverpool, who said he's still in shock at what's happened.
We call on government to take immediate action. We want the 800 seafarers reinstated, or alternatively we want P&O's licence in the UK to be raised, and the government needs to consider becoming the operator of last resort if we can't find someone to run the business in the appropriate manner.
Adults in hospital with COVID and flu at the same time are at much greater risk of severe disease and death. Scientists found that patients who had both coronavirus and influenza viruses were more than 4 times more likely to require ventilation support than if they just had COVID. And tributes have poured in for the drummer of the Foo Fighters, Taylor Hawkins, who's died at the age of 50. The world-famous rock band were on tour in South America when they announced his death. Lead singer Dave Grohl said the band are devastated by the untimely loss. Queen's guitarist Brian May said he's heartbroken, and the band's drummer Roger Taylor said he feels like he's lost his younger favourite brother. Well, this is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens now. Let's return to Nana.
So good evening, afternoon even. It is afternoon, isn't it? It's fast approaching 7 minutes after 4 o'clock. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. My God, Dominic Raab has come out of his shell and is finally doing something. After his embarrassing episode as Foreign Secretary when he stayed on holiday at the start of Joe Biden's chaotic withdrawal of Afghanistan, he's resurfaced as the Justice Minister, and it appears he's taking ownership of the worrying erosion of freedom of speech. He said, "I feel very strongly that the parameters of free speech and democratic debate are being whittled away, whether by the privacy issue or whether it's wokery and political correctness. I worry about those parameters of free speech being narrowed." Finally. Take the case of Meghan Markle and the Daily Mail as an example of this whole privacy thing happening. Unelected judges deciding what the parameters of privacy were without the approval of Parliament. Whilst there's no suggestion that they were not within their rights to do this, it's easy to see how this erosion can occur. And we see it happening on a daily basis. I mean, take the transgender conversation. Kathleen Stott being cancelled for daring to express the biological sex in her eyes, transgender, rather than those who disagreed accepting that this is a common view and that opening it out to debate would actually create a wider understanding of their perspective. She was effectively cancelled, and an attempt to silence and deplatform her led to her leaving her post. Attempts to cancel comedians and comedy in general have become commonplace. Remember Father Ted? I used to love that show. It was great, wasn't it? Its creator said that he'd been effectively cancelled and that the trans activists had cost him his family and his marriage. Rosie Duffield with a reference to women having a cervix, a perfectly correct and reasonable comment, which left her in fear of her safety, and she didn't want to attend her own party conference. J.K. Rowling was vilified by the transgender lobby for expressing her concerns over the erosion of women's rights, which, ironically, Vladimir Putin, who is the perfect example of why freedom of speech is important, decided to use her in his example. He claimed that the West were cancelling Russia in the same way J.K. Rowling was being cancelled, which is frankly laughable if it wasn't so scary. You can see why he hates the concept of freedom of speech, though. It challenges his very existence, and in that environment, his propaganda machine simply wouldn't work. And in Russia, people are afraid to speak out against their war with Ukraine, and in fact, they're not even allowed to call it a war for fear of prosecution and imprisonment. Remember the brave Russian newsreader? She spoke up against it. Well, we haven't heard much more about her since that. But she did it knowing the consequences, and so we can only say she was extremely brave. Dominic Raab said, we will still be clamping down on those who try to use either media or free speech to incite violence, to radicalise terrorists or to threaten children. All of those safeguards will be in place. We've got to be able to strengthen free speech, the liberty that guards all of our freedoms and all other freedoms, and stop it being whittled away surreptitiously, sometimes without us really being conscious of it. Bravo, Dominic. So before we get stuck into the debate, here's what else is coming up. Today is Purple Day. Now that's a day designed to raise awareness of epilepsy. And in my difficult conversation at 5, I'll meet a woman on a mission to do just that. Tori Robinson, who suffered with seizures since she was a child, will join me in the studio to share her story. The Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, which country is the biggest threat to UK security? At the moment, it seems all eyes are on Russia in terms of our international foes. But there is a risk that we're forgetting about other threats to the UK as well. This week, North Korea tested a new intercontinental ballistic missile with this flashy promo video. Take a look.
Firing the new type intercontinental ballistic missile of the strategic force of the DPRK, newly developed on March the 23rd.
US President Joe Biden is also embracing America's right to use nuclear weapons in a first strike scenario. So I want to ask, who is the biggest threat to the UK security? And we'll take a look at what's been making headlines in our royal household this week with the editor-in-chief of Majesty magazine, Ingrid Seward. And on the agenda today, we'll be talking about William and Kate's difficult and controversial visit to Jamaica, and so much more. So tell me what you think on everything we're discussing by emailing gbnews@gbnews.uk or tweet me @gbnews. Right, let's get started. Welcome again to my panel, the co-founder of Conservatives Against Racism, Albie Amankona, and also former Labour advisor Scarlett Maguire. First, I want to discuss, we were talking about freedom of speech. Freedom of speech. Scarlett, where do you stand with all of this?
I absolutely agree about freedom of speech, and what I wonder is why you didn't talk about the cancelling of Russia Today, actually. So now we cannot hear what Russia is saying because it's very dangerous propaganda. I think freedom of speech goes right across the board. And I think that if I absolutely agree about the trans debate, that there should be a debate rather than insults. And I have to say the insults come from both sides. They are appalling. But you know, the government, Ofcom, and nobody complained, it seemed to me, said, no more Russia Today. because it's dangerous. I think that's freedom of speech.
Well, no, yeah, but I like the fact that Dominic Raab also caveated it with that they're not going to allow certain things which are ridiculous. So if somebody is saying something that is, I mean, for example, things on Russian Today, as we know, even the newsreaders were coming out and saying, look, we're not telling the truth here. So if they're not telling the truth, and that is allowed to go unquestioned in a sense.
So I didn't understand that you were only allowed to say the truth. I mean, in the trans debate on both sides, people aren't always telling the truth.
Well,
what I'm saying is that actually it's really important. I worry, obviously, what I find Putin's invasion of Ukraine absolutely appalling. Let's get this straight. But all the coverage is from one side, and actually I'd like to hear what the Russians are saying,
yes,
and I don't have that right anymore.
But what I'm saying is that we are regulated by Ofcom. So if I was to say things, even though I have freedom of speech and I was making things up, then I wouldn't be allowed to do it, you see. So that's the difference there, obviously, and that's what Dominic Raab is saying, that actually there will be provisions to make sure that, there's the things that he said, examples of where freedom of speech is actually oppressing somebody else's right. But also, if it's not true, then you're not going to allow that to go out. But Albie, your thoughts?
I think my thoughts on freedom of speech is that it's really fundamental to our democratic system. And I think it was Voltaire who said, I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. And that's a really important principle that we always need to remember. And I think the trans debate is an example of where it's gotten really toxic. But there's one other thing that I think we need to think about with freedom of speech, and that is that we should treat other people how we'd like to be treated. And I don't think freedom of speech gives people license to be rude to each other.
Right.
That's the problem. So I think those two principles are really important when we're talking about difficult issues, and I'm sure that we can find a better narrative, and we need to find ways to disagree well, I think.
Or allow the opposite viewpoint to be expressed. But of course, if somebody is making stuff up and it's not true, then that's a whole different ballgame. I mean, that's what I put to you.
But I would like to know what the Russians are saying. I think it would be very interesting. And actually, what you have to do is you have to trust, say, the BBC's Russia correspondent that he's going to tell me, whereas I'd quite like to know what the Russians are saying.
Well, that's true, but then if you give oxygen to things that aren't true, in a sense, and we can see it. So, OK, it is true that a picture showed in many different ways can be expressed, and you can hear a different... You see the same picture, but there's a different story on the narrative. So, for example, the picture of William and Kate shaking hands with people in Jamaica. But then, of course, there's a picture of what was his name? Was it Marcus Rashford? It was Marcus Rashford, shaking hands as well. They suddenly criticised William and Kate, but yet Marcus Rashford did exactly the same thing. So a picture can be swayed and the narrative can be swayed. But I think we can all see that Russia is invading Ukraine, OK, and that is a war. So no one, it appears, is allowed to express it or call it a war. And that's where we need to be careful, in a sense. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why Russia Today, as many other reasons, was taken off air, because the narrative didn't really match the reality.
I think it's about freedom of speech. I really do. And I think that when we invaded Iraq, that we only heard it from our side and we didn't see the complete chaos afterwards. Earlier, Kuwait, there were stories that were being broadcast that were absolutely not true. They were completely mythical. And I think you need to have proper reporting so that you understand what's going on. You need to hear from both sides.
I'm just going to correct that as well. It was Raheem Sterling. That's it came to me just then. Raheem Sterling, not Marcus Rashford. But yes, it was Raheem Sterling. I do agree that you need to see both sides, but if one side isn't frankly telling the truth, then I haven't got time for that.
I think I agree with you on that, Nana. Scarlett, is Russia Today proper reporting, in your opinion?
I have never watched it, I have to say.
There you go, then.
No, but I just think it was absolutely wrong to cancel it. That's all I'm saying. Is that it was cancelled, right?
No, it wasn't cancelled. It was taken off air because it
was taken off. It was
because it breached Ofcom guidelines.
It was
because it breached Ofcom guidelines.
It's breached Ofcom guidelines for decades, and nobody has done anything about it. And then,
you've never watched it, with all respect. No. You did say you hadn't watched it.
I know, but we do know that it's breached Ofcom guidelines. We do know that it's Russian propaganda. It's always been Russian propaganda. There's absolutely no question. I mean, I was asked to appear on it and turned it down because it was Russian propaganda. All I'm saying is, why are we so frightened of it? And actually, all I'm really trying to say is that freedom of speech isn't just about, your so-called wokeness is actually it goes through everything, and it's and we should be able to see things that make us uncomfortable.
Well, that's true, but I think freedom of speech should be restricted when it stops somebody else's freedom. That has to be the case. Otherwise, you can just say what you like, do what you like. It doesn't give you right to do absolutely or say absolutely anything. What it does is just give you a freedom of expression, but there is a limit and a boundary, and as Albie said, treating others as you'd like to be treated, and you use that as your boundary. If you cross over that boundary, then there has to be some sort of recourse.
But it would also be very good for us to work out why the Russians aren't into complete rebellion, what the propaganda that the Russians are getting. I mean, I think it's really important that we understand that.
It's not that we can't. I mean, apparently, from what I've heard, is that some of the media in Russia is actually starting to reflect a more truthful picture, or the picture that we're seeing, and they're starting to reflect that, actually. So those media outlets are starting to say different things, and that's just what I heard on the media here. I don't know whether that is a reality, but it's clear to me, just looking at that, and also from the reports from people from Ukraine, that there is some very awful war happening. And
there is no question there is a terrible war happening.
But that's why Russia Today, I'm coming back to it. That is why if you change the dialogue when it's clear that it's not true, then at that point you're restricting other people's freedom to the actual reality of the situation.
And Scarlett, isn't it right that a broadcaster that breaches Ofcom guidelines is taken off air?
But then why didn't it happen much earlier? I mean, what I mean, we all knew about Russia Today. I really worry that because of what happened during the Iraq War, and what particularly happened during the first Iraq War, right, where myths were told on television, absolutely, terrible things, and it happens, as they say, the first casualty of war is truth, right? That we're getting it from one side. Now, I am not saying for a second that what is happening isn't absolutely appalling. The Russians are behaving appallingly. One doesn't understand Putin at all. All I'm saying is that for them not to be able to actually find out what Russia is saying, I mean, if you're talking about freedom, all I'm saying is talking about freedom of speech.
We can find out what Russia is saying if it were being broadcast and that. But frankly, I'm just personally not interested, because I can see what's going on with my own eyes. And even though I know you might have layers of propaganda that would be, from your perspective, so might reflect a slightly different truth, it would take a lot for me to be convinced that their projection of what they're saying on Russia Today is even close to the truth, and that is the problem.
Absolutely. And another question, Scarlett. I mean, would you be happy with Ofcom taking any broadcaster off air, using your argument that Russia Today should still be on air? What's your sort of watermark for taking something off air, if not Russia Today? Would you be comfortable with that at all?
Well, I mean, I just don't know. I mean, yes, I'd be very happy with it taking porn channels off air. I mean, there are and things that actually break the law. Look, all I'm trying to say is that freedom of speech is much more difficult than it appears, right? Is that freedom of speech is not about whether, Meghan Markle has a right to privacy, that actually they don't print a letter she wrote to her father. I don't understand why that is a freedom of speech issue, but never mind. But it is about other things.
That was an invasion of privacy. So, and what Dominic Raab was saying in that instance was that the erosion of this privacy is happening by unelected people who are maybe lawmakers or judges, rather than it passing through Parliament as to where that line should be. But anyway, we can talk more about that. In fact, at 5:20 we will do, because we'll be talking more about
certainly will.
Culture. So make sure you join us for that. It's going to be fiery. I'm looking forward to this. Yes, so make sure you join us when we discuss cancel culture and Putin's comments on the West cancelling Russian culture. There's lots more on that subject, so stay with us. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio, and still to come, it'll be our Great British Debate this hour, and I'm asking which country is the biggest threat to UK security. The international focus is on Russia at the moment, with perfectly justifiable. But just this week, North Korea conducted a new long-range missile test. So is our focus on Vladimir Putin making us forget about the other threats to UK security from countries like China, North Korea and Iran? Send us an email, gbnews@gbnews.uk. Tell us what you think. You can also tweet at GBNews, and there is a poll up right now asking which country is the biggest threat to UK security. Cast that vote now, but first let's get some weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking dry with clear skies for many, though cloudier for the Northern Isles. Let's take a look at the details. It's going to be fine end to the day in the southwest of England. The cloudless skies will remain, meaning it will turn chilly once the sun sets. The evening is looking similar across the southeast and the London area. Tomorrow is going to be cloudier and cooler than of late, though. There may be a little cloud across parts of Wales this evening. For many, there will still be clear skies through the night. In the Midlands, we'll have a sunny, rather warm end to the day, but those temperatures will quickly dip after dark. Tomorrow might be a little cloudier at times, though, but still warm. Many in the northeast will have clear skies to end the day, but notice the cloud lingering in the North Sea. This cloud will feed inland through the night, meaning tomorrow will be cloudier too. Across much of Scotland, there will be plenty of fine weather to end the day, but it's cloudier across the Northern Isles, though even here it's going to stay dry. There will be plenty of sunshine for Northern Ireland this evening, and that is the theme we will stick with for the next few days, staying warm by day but chilly overnight. Tomorrow, thick cloud will feed in from the east overnight, but sticking with clear skies further west, meaning it will turn chilly, and that's how your weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
It's 26 minutes after 4. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. I'm still joined by my fabulous panel, co-founder of Conservatives Against Racism, Albie Amankona, and also former Labour advisor, Scarlett Maguire. Right, so before the break, we were discussing the Justice Secretary's plans to boost our right to freedom of speech. Let's have a quick look at what you've already been saying. Bill says Scarlett can still watch Russia Today live very easily by clicking on the link at their website. I agree with her. We should listen to all points of view. Yeah, I think she's right, but not on TV. Stephen says, well, only in terms of Russia Today. Stephen says, freedom of speech is the foundation of our society, and it's the difference between us and brutal dictatorships. Absolutely. Ella says, of course, freedom of speech is really important, but you do need to be careful. There's a really fine line between speaking your mind and saying things that are hateful. William says, I have to spend a lot of time listening to a lot of people talking a lot of old tosh, but it's so important that people can express themselves, even if it's complete guff. Yeah, there is that too. I get it, but in the view, in terms of things like Russia Today, we are sort of regulated by Ofcom, so there are rules there as well. But it's now time for our Great British Debate this hour. I'm asking, which country is the biggest threat to UK security? Because this week, North Korea tested a new long-range missile with this Top Gun-inspired promotional video.
Firing the new type intercontinental ballistic missile of the strategic force of the DPRK, newly developed on March the 23rd.
I mean, seriously. At the moment, the focus of the international community is on Russia. But it seems some of the UK's foes are up to their usual tricks at a time when all eyes are on the events unfolding in Ukraine. Even the US President Joe Biden, who is a strong ally of the UK, has said that he refuses to rule out first strike use of nuclear weapons under extreme circumstances. So I want to ask if Putin's regime is really the biggest threat to our security, and if not, who is? I'm joined now by security specialist Will Geddes. No, Will, thank you very much for joining us. You're supposed to be in the studio, but it's fine. It's great to talk to you there. Now,
I'm sorry, Nana. I'm sorry. I can't join you today.
Never mind. Listen, do you think that the current focus on Russia has allowed some of our international competitors to slip under the radar?
Well, I think the focus obviously is going to be on the most tangible threat, and that is the one thing that obviously people will be most concentrated on. But when we consider the threats that we face here in the United Kingdom, to reiterate what Richard Moore, the head of MI6, has stated, we've got four major adversaries that we have to constantly be aware of. Russia obviously being one, China, Iran, and international terrorism. And that's where the focus is for the Secret Intelligence Service, are focusing their efforts in partnering particularly with British companies and industry to ensure that we are as robust as possible in terms of the types of threats that could be launched by any one of these.
I've been thinking about this and wondering, maybe we need to sort of make outlaw nuclear weapons full stop, and everyone should get rid of them, because no one really, realistically, should be pressing the button, frankly, because we know that it's complete annihilation of the planet, which seems a ridiculous end. It just doesn't make any sense. Do you think that that's a realistic thing to consider?
Not in the slightest, Nana. I would be opposed to disarming ourselves from nuclear capability. And unfortunately, the primary reason for that is the fact that if we don't have nuclear counter-deterrence or capabilities ourselves, then we leave ourselves incredibly exposed. And this is an argument and a debate that is brought up every time Trident is reassessed as a capability within, obviously, our defence budget. But equally, again, without having that nuclear capability and others having it, and particularly we look at, as I mentioned, of the big four, Iran being one of the biggest concerns is about their nuclear capability and what they're doing behind the scenes and not being incredibly transparent about. And North Korea being another case in point. And we saw that kind of hysterical promotional video for the missile launch, which I think is a case in point in terms of propaganda. So it's, if they have them, we have to have them.
Well, that's but my point was that everybody really should get rid of them, because there seems to be no real point to it, because at the end of the day, all you'll do is destroy the entire world, so no one wins. How has Russia seemingly failing to take Ukraine changed our perception on how powerful Putin's regime actually is?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, and we're seeing a lot of change and headwind actually within Russia. And I was with some Russian friends last night. We were talking about this in terms of the groundswell of the general population and the general public in Russia, who are very anti and opposed to what Putin is doing. And everybody is looking at him as the megalomaniac dictator who is running to his own agenda. He's not looking at the vested interests of the nation as a whole in terms of what this conflict is going to bring to them other than hardship and misery. And certainly the Russian people, we have to feel sympathetic for, because they're not endorsing their leader, quite the contrary. And we've seen this in terms of even his state instruments like the FSB, the new name for the KGB, who are tipping off Vladimir Zelensky in terms of the types of threats that are being faced by him, assassination and kill teams which are being launched by Wagner Group. There's a lot of dissent within his own country.
Well, listen, I literally have to leave it there, but I've got so many other questions to ask you. I mean, very, very briefly, in 10 seconds, what about Iran? Do they have nuclear weapons?
They have nuclear capability, absolutely, and they're trying to build it more and more. So, and Iran, we have to remember, are using instruments like Hezbollah to launch attacks. And Iran, I've seen operating in all sorts of interesting ways, especially, for example, in Iraq. And I know that's something that your guests have been talking about. They've been running all sorts of sorties and operations across the border. So, they are a formidable threat. But each of these countries presents a different type of threat.
And Will, I'm going to squeeze another one in, but it literally has to be 10 seconds. What about North Korea? What kind of threat? 1 to 5.
Well, I would say it's pretty much I'd say around the 3. It depends on who you're considering as the target. We have got a pretty mad megalomaniac dictator again, someone who is extremely volatile. So we have to keep him in a box. And as much as you may or may not like Trump, and this is something your guests will probably want to ride along on afterwards, he had made some good headway with Kim Jong-un in terms of trying to appease some kind of peace deal, some sort of treaty with him. But that has now been eradicated.
Well, listen, Will, it's good to talk to you. There seems to be a common theme there, megalomaniacs. Listen, Will, thank you so much for joining us. This is GB News. I'm Nana Akua. You're either watching on TV or online or listening on digital radio. Now, after the break, we'll continue the great British debate. I'm asking which country is the biggest threat to UK security. You'll hear the thoughts of my panel, former Labour advisor Scarlett Maguire, and also co-founder of Conservatives Against Racism, Albi Amankona. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
It's 4:33. I'm Miranda Shunker in the GB newsroom. The mayor of Ukraine's capital, Kiev, Vitaly Klitschko, and his brother Vladimir are warning the world is at risk if Russia targets Ukraine's nuclear plants. In an interview with GB News, the Klitschko brothers said they're grateful to Britain and the US for the support they've received, but it's just not enough.
Putin's Russia is doing right now, destroying actually its own people. Destroying life, destroying stability in the world, destroying nuclear power plants that were on fire. And this is something that the world needs to pay attention to.
The governor of Ukraine's Lviv region says 2 rocket strikes have hit within the city's limits, with 5 people wounded. It's after witnesses reported hearing 3 powerful explosions, with black smoke seen rising from the northeastern side of the city. The US president says he isn't confident Russia has changed strategy in Ukraine and has labelled Vladimir Putin a butcher. It's after Russia claimed it's moving its focus to the eastern region of Donbass. Joe Biden is in Warsaw today, meeting Ukrainian refugees and the city's mayor to discuss the humanitarian response to the war. And in other news, protests are taking place at UK ports over the sacking of hundreds of P&O Ferries staff as calls grow for the company's boss to quit.
What do we want? Censorship! When do we want it? Now!
Well, meanwhile, a P&O ferry has been held in Northern Ireland for being unfit to sail over failures with required documents and crew training. The operator replaced 800 seafarers with agency staff just days ago. Well, on TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Stay with us. Nana will be back in just a moment.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube. You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back if you've just tuned in. Where have you been? I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Now we return to our Great British debate this hour, and I'm asking which country, in your view, is the biggest threat to the UK security? At the moment, it seems all eyes are on the international stage. They're all on Russia with its invasion of Ukraine, but there's a risk that we're forgetting about other threats to our security. As this week, North Korea tested a new intercontinental ballistic missile. There's also challenges from Iran and China, who are threatening nuclear weapons. Looking to our allies too, I mean, the US President Joe Biden has embraced America's right to use such weapons in extreme circumstances. I mean, it's not like you can stop the radiation from once you cross a border. So I want to ask, who is the biggest threat to UK? Who do you think? Let's have a quick look at what you've already been saying. Craig says China probably, although it is the one with arguably the most stable leadership. In a way, yes, but, you know, they want to sell everything to us, so they don't want to annihilate us. Ethan says, at this present moment, it is Russia. However, like Russia, the West is currently funding China's military expansion by being reliant on China's production. And it's interesting, nobody's really talking about that. We've seen what happens over-reliance on something like oil and how powerful that country can become. And then, of course, it's against us. Abe says, I think it's Iran. Donald Trump abandoned the nuclear deal, which stopped them developing nuclear weapons. And now they can enrich uranium as they please. Wow. Clever listeners, aren't they, and viewers? They've got some good points here. Let's see what my panel make of that. Let's see if they can say anything equally as intelligent. Thanks, guys. I'm joined, of course, by the co-founder of Conservatives Against Racism, Albie Ammon-Kona, and also a former advisor to the Labour Party, Scarlett Maguire. Right, I'm going to start with you, Albie, then. There's all threats from all sides. Even Joe Biden could be perceived as a threat, especially as he doesn't quite, to me, come across completely compos mentis, which is a worry. But what would you say is the biggest threat?
I think Will was right to say that we face different threats from different countries, and he listed China, Russia, Iran and international terrorism as the main threats to Britain. North Korea wasn't even on the list. That doesn't mean it's not a threat, but we face different threats from different countries. You know, and when we think about Russia and what's gone on since, you know, the beginning of the 21st century, we saw what happened with Litvinenko, we saw what happened in Salisbury, you know, we're under constant threat from sort of cyber warfare from Russia as well. And I think the fact that Russia is on the European continent, it certainly feels like a closer threat than maybe some of the locations that are further afield.
Interesting. Yes, what do you think?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I remember in the 80s that we were very, very worried that there was a sort of a proto-war about to go on between America and Russia in Europe, right? That it was, and always there was this fear that we would be there while the two big powers sort of fought it out, because they're unlikely to send nuclear weapons to each other. So I think if we're talking about annihilation, I mean, obviously, it has to be Russia. I mean, I don't think Iran is going to try and annihilate us. I mean, I think Iran is more of a problem with international terrorism. problem with North Korea, I completely agree with you. I don't think it's a threat to us, but my God, I mean, you've got this monomaniac who's saying, why isn't anybody paying attention to me at the moment? And so let's let off this. I mean, I think if I was one of their neighbours, or even the west coast of the United States, I'd be quite worried about that.
Do you know, this could almost be a board game, couldn't it? Each of the characters, you've got Kim Jong-un with his sort of flat hairstyle, you've got Donald Trump or Joe Biden, whichever one you want to put there, doddering around Joe Biden. You've got one that looks really old, as though he shouldn't really be running anything. And then you've got Boris Johnson with his hair like waving around. You've got all these Vladimir Putin, who looks to me, well, he doesn't look great to me. He looks like a very, very scary and quite a ruthless character. And they've all got something in common, that they're all basically megalomaniacs, aren't they? In a sense, in my view, they all come across as these real sort of domineering type characters who are so power hungry in every sense. And there doesn't seem to be. And the worrying thing is, those are the ones who are dealing with things where they are the people who pose the greatest threat.
I thought you were really interesting about getting rid of nuclear weapons, and I completely understand. I mean, you know, about the fear and why many people are multilateralists, but you do think we are completely mad, actually, not to have a total pact and say, if we get rid of them all, then, you know, we can fight wars. And I mean, it's terrible what's happening in Ukraine and thousands of people are dying, but actually they're not wiping out a country overnight.
Yeah, it just doesn't make sense, ultimately. Now, I'm not saying that we should get rid of them and the others shouldn't, because that's the problem with Ukraine. They got rid of their nuclear weapons as part of the Non-Proliferation Treaty and this Budapest Memorandum, which was signed, and Russia was one of the signatories on there. And they got rid of their weapons and were guaranteed some sort of protection. And, of course, now this is happening, and I can't see that Russia would have invaded in that manner had Ukraine had some sort of capacity in terms of nuclear weapons. But then, on the other hand, if everybody gets rid of them, then this sort of threat won't exist in this complete global annihilation manner.
But I think on the point about nuclear weapons, we can't uninvent nuclear weapons. And I think even if there was a global pact for nuclear disarmament, what's to say that a country which isn't, you know, a transparent liberal democracy like Russia wouldn't just keep them in secret? You know, it's against the law to use chemical weapons. Countries still use chemical weapons. So I think it's a bit of a fantasy to say we should get rid of nuclear weapons, everyone should get rid of them.
Well, no, I'm just saying it would be lovely if we could, but I can't see it happening.
But I don't think it's possible.
No, I don't see it happening at all. But what I'm saying is, I think that would be ultimately the answer, because then you're not, you know, because there's no end to it. Everybody loses, right? You annihilate the planet, because if, for example, one of those countries sets off a nuclear weapon, then it is likely to have a retaliatory weapon going in the other direction. And then you've got two nuclear potential bombs going off. You've got radiation that has no boundaries or borders, and that will affect people who aren't even involved in the conflict. And then the land itself is unusable, and it kills millions.
I mean,
it makes no sense.
You're absolutely right. It's about mutual destruction.
You get nothing.
I mean, there's no question that the minute, you know, if Putin decides to send a nuclear bomb, wherever he decides to send it, one will go back. I mean, that's what's so terrible about it. And meanwhile, you know, these sort of megalomaniac men are playing. I mean, it's like they're playing poker. It's how much we can bluff. I mean, it is terrifying.
It is terrifying. Well, let's see what you're saying. It's all right, cheer up. It's Saturday. We have a great time. At least we can discuss. We can at least have the conversation, which would be more than you could have in places like Russia. But as ever, this show's nothing without your views. Let's welcome one of our great British voices. It's your chance to be on the show. Tell us what you really think about the topics that we're discussing. Oliver Hodgson is from Cumbria. Oliver, thank you for joining us. I remember you, my Gen Zer. Oliver, so talk to me then. Who do you think is the biggest threat to UK security?
Look, I think China is constantly one of the countries in secrecy. They tend to, you know, they don't go for the North Korean style PR promo videos. I think that's quite worrying. They are very silent at the minute as well. And as one of your viewers tweeted in, you know, we do prop up their funds by being so reliant on everything that comes from China and the production they provide. But actually, you know, as you said earlier, I totally agree. You know, why can't we get rid of this whole nuclear weapons situation, because we only have them and other countries only have them because one has them. And it seems to be, it's all very movie-like. It's a fight for power. It's a fight for media coverage. You know, these leaders seem to have egos bigger than some of the biggest celebrities. Yeah. It's turned into such a squabble and a fight between leaders as to who looks better on the global stage. And let's face it, we're also, you know, especially in this country, we're very proud of our men and women who fight on the front line, our people. How can you be proud of a leader when it comes to it, they want to cause catastrophe? All they do is press a button. That's nothing to be proud of. You know what I mean? Sit back in your big office and press a button when you think catastrophe is required. And I think that's ultimately what these nuclear weapons do, as you alluded to earlier. It just causes outright catastrophe. And why is that good for anybody? What does it achieve? It just wipes out your argument. And the biggest thing in when you've got an issue with somebody, or when you know, we all have arguments ourselves. You don't go around killing people, do you? You actually come to the table and resolve these things. I don't think conflict, no matter in what capacity, solves anything, but particularly with these nuclear weapons. But yeah, just to reiterate, I think China, they're quite concerning, their silence on a lot of these conversations at the minute. But I mean, North Korea and Kim Jong-un, you know, this PR agency style video, I just think it's absolutely absurd. It's like we're watching a movie unfold. And I think that taps into people's real fear, because they're not used to seeing world leaders behave like movie characters.
Or people that could appear on a board game in some scary game called Annihilate the World. Listen, Oliver, thank you so much for joining us. It's really good to talk to you and to hear your views. That's Oliver Hodgson. He's a great British voice. Right, so yes, that's what Oliver said. I think he was very eloquent. I think, once again, he's made some very good points. And I like the fact that his generation he's obviously a representative of a lot of, potentially a wider view, that actually, if you could remove nuclear weapons from the entire equation, that there would potentially be a better world order, but I don't see that happening at all either. I'm with you on that, Albie. Yeah, it's not going to happen, sadly.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, you can't uninvent them, and yet, you know, you just look at what happened in Hiroshima, and it's just terrible. I mean, just terrible.
But it is a bit pointless as well, because nobody wins. Well, I've been asking who's the biggest threat to UK security. Lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts. Barbara says China is the bigger risk, although Putin is a megalomaniac. He's pretty obvious, but China is more devious, covert and brutal. And also, once again, we are funding it, aren't we? We're funding it, like we were funding oil. Vladimir Putin, who's now invested that in, obviously, his war machine. It's the same again. We are buying so much from China when a lot of that stuff we could manufacture in this country and do ourselves, but what are we worried about? Wendy says, I don't think North Korea is that much of a risk. At the end of the day, Kim Jong-un is just obsessed with his regime's survival. As long as he's in power, we're fine. Tom says, 100% China. It's a huge economic threat to us. Mary says, I think Russia are the most immediate threat. It's so obvious. Yes, it is. They are the most immediate threat at this present time, but it is true that there's a veil, in a way, that you can't see what else is behind that. But there's a poll up on Twitter today throughout the show, and I'm asking you which country is the biggest threat to UK security. And currently, only 3% of you say North Korea, 5% say it's Iran, 32% say Russia, but guess what? 60% of you say China. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Keep your thoughts coming. After the break, despite being a popular king in waiting, Prince William and his wife Kate had a trip to forget in Jamaica this week. They were told by the country's Prime Minister that the country was moving on. We'll discuss that and all the latest news in the royal household after the break with Ingrid Seward, who's the editor-in-chief of Majesty magazine. But first, let's get some weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking dry with clear skies for many, though cloudier for the Northern Isles. Let's take a look at the details. It's going to be fine end to the day in the southwest of England. The cloudless skies will remain, meaning it will turn chilly once the sun sets. The evening is looking similar across the southeast and the London area. Tomorrow is going to be cloudier and cooler than of late, though. There may be a little cloud across parts of Wales this evening. For many, there will still be clear skies through the night. In the Midlands, we'll have a sunny, rather warm end to the day, but those temperatures will quickly dip after dark. Tomorrow might be a little cloudier at times, though, but still warm. Many in the northeast will have clear skies to end the day, but notice the cloud lingering in the North Sea. This cloud will feed inland through the night, meaning tomorrow will be cloudier too. Across much of Scotland, there will be plenty of fine weather to end the day, but it's cloudier across the Northern Isles, though even here it's going to stay dry. There will be plenty of sunshine for Northern Ireland this evening, and that is the theme we will stick with for the next few days, staying warm by day but chilly overnight. Tomorrow, thick cloud will feed in from the east overnight, but sticking with clear skies further west, meaning it will turn chilly, and that's how your weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
So good afternoon. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. Now it's time to take a look at what's happening and what's making the headlines in the royal household this week. On the agenda today, we're reflecting on William and Kate's tour of the Caribbean. It didn't really go that well after the Prime Minister of Jamaica told them that the country was moving on. We've all been in a relationship like that, and somebody tells you that, it's not great, is it? We'll also discuss Prince Charles' calls to end violence against women and reports that the Queen is planning to attend a Thanksgiving service for the Duke of Edinburgh next week. So let's say a big hello to Ingrid Seward. She's the editor-in-chief of Magister magazine. Hello, Ingrid. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's start with William and Kate and their tour of the Caribbean.
Right. Now, I just will say, I can't hear you very well. The sound keeps fading in and out. So if you'll forgive me if I look a bit blank, it means I haven't heard it.
Okay, so tell us a bit about William and Kate and their tour.
Well, the tour has been beset by controversy, but I think that the controversy has really was quite expected because the three countries that they visited, but the Bahamas, well, first of all, they were in Belize, then they were in Jamaica, then they were in the Bahamas. And all these three countries are independent, and they've got the anniversary of their independence coming up. And when you've got the world's press there following these two members of the royal family, it's a moment to say and get global attention to say what you feel. So the Jamaican Prime Minister waded straight in, saying that, lovely to meet you, but we don't really want, we've got to tell your grandmother that we don't really want to be her as head of state anymore. I think William dealt with it very, very well and in a very statesmanlike way the whole way through the tour. But this was the sort of elephant in the room, if you like. And I think these two were brilliant and handled it very, very well. I mean, they would have been briefed that this was quite likely to happen. And I think that everything's moved on so quickly since the pandemic and since Black Lives Matter. And it's a very, very different place than when the Queen last visited the Caribbean, which I think was in just after her sister had died and had her funeral, Princess Margaret. The Queen went to Jamaica, which was 2002. And, she received a rapturous welcome. But, the world has moved on a lot since then. So I think that William and Kate expected this. They were briefed with what to do. And the press have got to write about something. And I feel that they've rather exaggerated the difficulties of this tour.
You think? OK, well, what about... crikey. If we move on from the tour to Prince Charles then and his calls for the end to violence against women. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Well, I mean, it's very interesting because Prince Charles normally goes off on his own agenda, and he's been giving some wonderful speeches while he's been in Ireland, all about unity in the two countries and the history. But then he decided that he would back his wife, the Duchess of Cornwall, whose big thing is this violence against women and, how to stop it. And she's got a charity that deals with all this. And Prince Charles, gave a very moving speech. And it was really because it was Ashley, I think that's how you say it, Murphy, who is age 23, who was murdered there. And Prince Charles used this as an opportunity to say that he was, very pro helping this violence against women. It should never happen. It's a terrible thing. So they've rather united on that, which is interesting and quite unusual that they should both speak about the same subject. So they obviously felt very, very strongly about it.
And finally, briefly, the Queen attending the Thanksgiving service for the life of Prince Philip.
Well, on Tuesday, there is a service at Westminster Abbey, a memorial service for Prince Philip, and it's going to be a very big affair. All the royal family will be there, and there'll be representatives of the 700 charity patronage, charities of which he was patron. So there's going to be a lot of people there, and a lot of relatives, a lot of members of foreign royal families, and the Queen, the Buckingham Palace, are not saying whether the Queen will definitely attend, but I'm certain she will, because she will know it's very important to her, and also her husband would have expected that she would attend regardless of how much pain she's in, and we just sincerely hope she isn't in too much pain. But yeah. I think she will definitely be there unless her pain gets worse.
Yeah, well, we hope she does, because she's fabulous, isn't she? Ingrid, thank you so much for talking to us. That is Ingrid Seward. She's the editor-in-chief of Majesty magazine. Right, so for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking which country is the biggest threat to UK security, and lots of you have been getting in touch with your views. Mary says, Nana, Putin looks like a Bond villain. All he needs is a white fluffy cat on his lap. Kim Jong-un thinks he's Tom Cruise. Boris thinks he's Winston Churchill. Biden doesn't know who he is or where he is. I love that. It's true, isn't it? They're all like so sort of odd. Ian says, why worry about nuclear weapons when climate change is going to wipe us all out shortly anyway? And it's the same countries fueling that, China and Russia. And Roland says, China is the greatest threat to world peace. They're watching and waiting for the West to tie itself up, and they'll invade Taiwan. Well, keep your thoughts coming. You're watching me, Nana Akua. This is GB News. More to come in the next hour. So for the next hour, me and my panel We'll be taking on some of those big topics that are hitting the headlines right now. If you've just tuned in, I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News. Shortly, we'll go live to Poland, where the President of the United States, Joe Biden, has met with top Ukrainian officials. He'll be making a speech very shortly. We'll bring that to you. But first, let's get your latest news headlines. Good afternoon, it's 5 o'clock. I'm Miranda Shunker in the GB newsroom. The mayor of Ukraine's capital, Vitaly Klitschko, and his brother Vladimir are warning the world is at risk if Russia targets Ukraine's nuclear plants. In an interview with GB News, the Klitschko brothers said they're grateful to Britain and the US for the support they've received, but it's just not enough. They accused Russia of consistent lies and said they can't be trusted in peace talks.
We've got 4 nuclear power plants. One of them was on fire. Over 1,000 rockets, up to 2,000 rockets were launched and landed on Ukrainian soil. There is no guarantee that one of those rockets not just going to kill civilians, but going to hit this or those power plants. And if that's going to be targeted and eventually exploded, the world is going to face Chernobyl and Fukushima in multiple times.
Well, Russian forces have taken control of a town in Ukraine where workers at the Chernobyl nuclear plant live. The governor of the Kiev region has said protests in the centre of town have been targeted by Russian fire and stun grenades. The governor of Ukraine's Lviv region says 2 rocket strikes hit within Lviv city limits, with 5 people wounded. It's after witnesses reported hearing 3 powerful explosions with black smoke seen rising from the northeastern side of the city. The region's governor says a facility storing fuel is burning. Meanwhile, the Russian Defence Ministry has released footage of what it claims was the launch of cruise missiles at targets in Ukraine. Russia says the missiles hit a military target in the east of the country. Reporters in Poland asked President Biden what he thought of President Putin.
Butcher.
Joe Biden is in Warsaw meeting Ukrainian refugees and the city's mayor to discuss the humanitarian response to the war. Earlier, he held talks with his Polish counterpart, President Duda. Meanwhile, the Mayor of London is taking part in a solidarity march in the capital to send a unified message of support to the people of Ukraine. Sadiq Khan said the UK should be doing much more to aid Ukrainian refugees. 150,000 families in the UK have now stepped forward as part of the Homes for Ukraine scheme, with 20,000 visas already granted.
Londoners over the last few weeks have shown that we're opening our arms to Ukrainian refugees, whether it's by donating money to those charities doing a brilliant job in Ukraine and just outside Ukraine, or whether by opening our homes to those fleeing Ukraine. It is important that over the next few days and weeks we make it far, far easier, much more easier for those who are fleeing Ukraine to come here.
And in other news, protests are taking place at UK ports over the sacking of hundreds of P&O Ferries staff as calls grow for the company's boss to quit.
What do we want? Censorship! When do we want it? Now!
A P&O ferry has also been held in Northern Ireland for being unfit to sail due to failures over vessel documents and crew training. The operator replaced 800 seafarers with agency staff on cheaper salaries just days ago. Well, our East Midlands reporter spoke to Steve Doran, national organiser of Nautilus International, at a protest in Liverpool, who said he's still in shock at what's happened.
We call on government to take immediate action. We want the 800 seafarers reinstated, or alternatively we want P&O's licence in the UK to be raised, and the government needs to consider becoming the operator of last resort if we can't find someone to run the business in the appropriate manner.
Formula One's Saudi Arabian Grand Prix will go ahead after the teams received safety assurances following attacks on an oil facility near the Jeddah street circuit on Friday. The Iran-aligned Houthis have escalated missile and drone attacks on the Saudi kingdom's oil facilities in recent weeks, including Aramco's distribution station. A Saudi-led coalition has begun a military operation in Yemen to stop the attacks, with airstrikes in Yemen's Houthi-controlled capital and in the Red Sea port city of Hodeidah. 8 people were killed in the first airstrike. And tributes have poured in from across the music world to the drummer of the Foo Fighters, Taylor Hawkins, who's died at the age of 50. The rock band were on tour in South America when they announced his death. It's believed paramedics tried to revive him at his hotel in Colombia following reports of a man with chest pain. Lead singer Dave Grohl said the band are devastated by the untimely loss. Duran Duran star Roger Taylor said Hawkins was one of the last true rock star drummers of our time. Well, this is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Nana.
So good afternoon. If you've just tuned in, welcome on board. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. And for the next hour, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. So joining me today, it's co-founders of Conservatives Against Racism, Albie Amankona, and former Labour advisor Scarlett Maguire. Still to come, shortly we'll go live to Poland, where the President of the United States, Joe Biden, has met with top Ukrainian officials. He'll be making a speech very shortly, and we'll bring you that as soon as it's there. In a few moments, though, for my difficult conversation this week, I'll meet the woman on a mission to raise more awareness of epilepsy. Today is Purple Day, and that is the biggest awareness drive for the condition. Tori Robinson, who's suffered with seizures since she was a child, will join me in the studio to share her story. The Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, how do we stop cancel culture? Or how do we cancel culture? Vladimir Putin has hit out at Western cancel culture, complaining that the cancellation of J.K. Rowling for her comments on transgender issues with the West's discrimination of Russian culture in the wake of their invasion of Ukraine. His comments, though, are highly contentious and were total nonsense, actually, do raise interesting points on the day when Justice Secretary Dominic Raab is fighting for the UK's freedom of speech. So I'm asking, how do we cancel culture? And a US President Joe Biden meets leaders in Poland. The former President Donald Trump is making his voice heard back in America at a rally in Georgia. We'll ask, can he really make it back into office? Let me know what you think on everything we discuss. You can email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. So it's time now for difficult conversations, and this week I'm focusing on the serious neurological condition epilepsy. Around 600,000 people in the UK suffer with the condition, and that's around 1 in every 100 people. And it can cause severe seizures, which can lead to serious health complications and are often triggered without warning. But despite the condition affecting so many people across the UK, a recent study shows that over half of the people with it say the public don't know enough about its impact and they wish that there was more awareness. So that's where today comes in. It's Purple Day today, the annual awareness drive for epilepsy. And my guest is doing everything to make sure she can help people with awareness for the condition and show them how it affects her. Tori Robinson has had epilepsy since she was a child and had suffered a number of seizures. Just a couple of years ago, she underwent a major operation which saved her life. I'm delighted to say I'm joined in the studio by Tori. Tori, hello and welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining me. I noticed that you went purple.
Yeah, it's not normally my colour, actually. I'm a bit of a blue and a red girl, but Purple Day.
Well, I love purple. It's my favourite colour, alongside green. So, Tori, tell me a little bit about you then, because most people with epilepsy, I presume they're diagnosed when they're very young, or what was your story?
That's actually, do you know what? There isn't a norm for epilepsy. You can be diagnosed at absolutely any age. My story was, well, I was having seizures for years before anybody noticed. I had a... You look shocked,
How could you have
right?
a seizure without anyone noticing? I thought it was a very visual thing that people could see.
It can be, but there are over 60 different types of epileptic seizure. And the ones I was having at the time, people thought I was just staring into space, and when I was at school. And so I think my parents just thought I was being a bit more weird than normal. And then they noticed that's not right. And then they took me to the doc, who referred me to the neurologist. And after an EEG scan, which is really, a lot of people know what that is, electrodes on the head, it showed no abnormalities at all. That's really common, but I was still diagnosed with epilepsy.
Really? So for you, your seizure, what kind of form does it take then? Is it just that you stare into space?
Well, sometimes there is such irregularity with my epilepsy specifically and many other people's. If I'm having a seizure, it depends if I have solely one that starts in the left side of my brain and I might stare into space, or I might start shaking if it gets worse, and then if it travels to the rest of my brain, that will be the stereotypical one, which we call a tonic-clonic seizure, and I lose consciousness. But since I've had my brain surgery, which was actually in 2013, things have been heaps better.
Wow. So on average then, how many kind of seizures were you having? Was it a daily thing or was it a weekly thing?
For myself, it was hard to count because I was so not with it, but they were increasing in frequency. So I might have 3, 6 a month, then not have it for a month. And the older I got, the worse it became, unfortunately. But that is not always the case. Lots of people grow out of it if they have them in childhood. And the number's increasing actually in the elderly because we're living longer, and people, and especially with dementia and things like that. So,
and do we know what kind of causes epilepsy? And in your case, do you know what the cause is?
It's really hard to say. About 50% of people with epilepsy know what the cause is, so it's quite frustrating for many of the other 50%. Mine may be down to a really bad febrile seizure I had when I was 10 months old that lasted over an hour and could have caused brain damage. But I honestly don't know. And there could be a genetic factor as well. Lots of people with epilepsy will develop it as a result of some genetic mutation, but we don't know about it. There are very subtle differences amongst us all.
Yeah, of course. And then your seizures, sorry. So yours were discovered when you were 10, you were diagnosed with epilepsy?
Yeah, but I remember one from when I was 6.
Right, and you yourself, do you know it's happening to you? Because you said that you could be staring into space and things like that. Do you know that it's happening?
If I'm having that type, no, because I kind of grew out of those ones. I don't have that type anymore. But if I'm having a milder type and I get an aura, that aura, if you think about it, is actually a seizure itself, but it can be a warning for a more severe one. And I'm really grateful for that because lots of people with epilepsy don't have those warnings. They can just go straight into it, and that's pretty scary,
So you said an aura. What's that? Because I'm thinking, that, like the ready-brek person, and he's got to go around, and you had this sort of feeling. Is it? What does that mean? And how could other people spot it if say, that was about to happen to you?
So lots of us have fainted before.
Right.
That feeling when you're about to faint, that's kind of, to me, what an aura feels like. I've only fainted once, it feels like that. It's like, oh my God, something bad is going to happen. And yes, that's why we call it a warning. And if you're lucky enough to have those, you can try and put yourself in a safe place, things like that.
So if someone is having that seizure, and as someone like me is identified that is what's happening, what is the best course of action? What should I do?
I would say try and make sure that they're in a safe place, rather than, because one time at band camp, I walked to the end of the platform at rush hour and fell on the railway line. That's not a great idea, Obviously, that wasn't a conscious choice. No. But if you know somebody's like walking around, often looking a bit drunk, they could be having a seizure. I was arrested once because they thought that I was just too drunk, but I wasn't. I'd had a seizure.
So we're kind of looking around for somebody who may look a bit kind of lost in a sense.
Yeah.
And they may appear to have lost sort of control in a sense of their faculties and their sort of awareness.
Exactly. You look a bit off your face. I once on the... It's true. Say it as it is. Honestly, at one time I was actually on the tube and I started to try and open the lifts. I was having a seizure and I just thought I could open the lift and I don't know why. That people would often think, I imagine, she's a bit off her face, a bit drunk, she's on drugs. Sometimes it can be a person with epilepsy.
That's very difficult, then, isn't it, for people to work out whether somebody's actually going through something like that? Because when they always depict somebody who's having a fit, they're always saying, you know, stop them from swallowing with their tongue and all this.
Impossible.
Is that true? That's not something that you should be doing. You don't put your hand in someone's mouth if they're having a seizure.
Not unless you want your fingers bitten off, no. And also, like, you can't swallow your tongue either.
You can't swallow your tongue. That's nonsense.
Absolute nonsense. And it's funny because, well, not funny, but you have the most educated people in the country, and they often don't know what to do. But I'm not angry with them at all. No. The thing is, we don't talk about it enough. And on my way here, I was thinking, what would I do if somebody with, like, type 1 diabetes was, I don't even know what the term for it is, but their blood sugar was low, and I'm not quite sure. If I had a banana, would I give it to them? I don't know if that's the right decision. So I think we really need to encourage people just to ask these awkward questions.
Yeah.
Because it shouldn't be awkward, right?
No, not really. You see, because that's another one. Is it that's why I asked about the tongue thing? Because that's what I'd heard, that someone swallows their tongue, or you know. So, what are, if you could give me 3 words? If I, you know, so if someone's having a stroke, you've been given certain things to look for. Is there sort of a bit of alliteration or something that we need to be looking out for somebody?
So,
3 words that would identify whether someone's going through anything like that.
Well, certainly not 3 words because it's such a complex condition. But if you think somebody's looking a bit, as I say, off their face or staring into space, or they're wandering around, or actually sometimes stripping. I used to strip during seizures, not voluntarily. Then help them into a safe place. They might not like being touched, but if you're going to keep them in a safe place and possibly save their lives and save them from injuring themselves.
Of course.
And if they fall, just help them down. I've done that for a friend before, and just cradle their head. But always time that seizure.
Time the seizure.
Have to, because if it goes on longer than 5 minutes, it becomes dangerous, and that's when you call an ambulance.
Well, listen, it's really good to talk to you, Tori. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Difficult conversations. We can now go live to Poland, where the President of the United States, Joe Biden, has met with top Ukrainian officials. He's now delivering a speech on those talks.
Be not afraid. These were the first words at the first public address of the first Polish Pope after his election in October 1978. They were the words that would come to define Pope John Paul II. Words that would change the world. John Paul brought the message here to Warsaw in his first trip back home as Pope in June of 1979. It was a message about the power of faith, the power of resilience, the power of the people. In the face of a cruel and brutal system of government, it was a message that helped end the Soviet repression in the Central Land and Eastern Europe 30 years ago. It was a message that will overcome the cruelty and brutality of this unjust war. When Pope John Paul brought that message in 1979, the Soviet Union ruled with an iron fist behind an iron curtain. Then a year later, the Solidarity movement took hold in Poland. While I know he couldn't be here tonight, we're all grateful in America and around the world for Lech Walesa. Reminds me of that phrase of philosopher Kierkegaard. Faith sees best in the dark. And they were dark moments. 10 years later, the Soviet Union collapsed, and Poland and Central and Eastern Europe would soon be free. Nothing about that battle for freedom was simple or easy. It was a long, painful slog, fought over not days and months, but years and decades. But we emerged anew in the great battle for freedom, a battle between democracy and autocracy, between liberty and repression, between a rules-based order and one governed by brute force. In this battle, we need to be clear-eyed. This battle will not be won in days or months either. We need to steel ourselves for the long fight ahead. Mr. President, Mr. Prime Minister, Mr. Mayor, members of the Parliament, distinguished guests, and the people of Poland, and I suspect some people of Ukraine that are here. We are gathered here at the Royal Castle in this city that holds a sacred place in the history of not only of Europe, but humankind's unending search for freedom. For generations, Warsaw has stood where liberty has been challenged and liberty has prevailed. In fact, it was here in Warsaw when a young refugee who fled her home country from Czechoslovakia was under Soviet domination came back to speak and stand in solidarity with dissidents. Her name was Madeleine Koble Albright. She became one of the most ardent supporters of democracy in the world. She was a friend with whom I served, America's first woman Secretary of State. She passed away 3 days ago. She fought her whole life for essential democratic principles. And now, in the perennial struggle for democracy and freedom, Ukraine and its people are in the front lines, fighting to save their nation. And their brave resistance is part of a larger fight for an essential democratic principles that unite all free people. The rule of law, fair and free elections, the freedom to speak, the right and to assemble, the freedom to worship as one chooses, freedom of the press. These principles are essential in a free society. But they have always been under siege. They've always been embattled. Every generation has had to defeat democracy's moral foes. That's the way of the world, where the world is imperfect, as we know, where the appetites and ambitions of a few forever seek to dominate the lives and liberty of many. My message to the people of Ukraine is a message I delivered today to Ukraine's foreign minister and defense minister, who I believe are here tonight. We stand with you, period. Today's fighting in Kyiv and Metropole and Kharkiv are the latest battle in a long struggle. Hungary, 1956. Poland, 1956, and then again, 1981. Czechoslovakia, 1968. Soviet tanks crushed democratic uprisings. But the resistance continued until finally, in 1989, the Berlin Wall and all the walls of Soviet domination, they fell. They fell. And the people prevailed. But the battle for democracy could not conclude and did not conclude with the end of the Cold War. Over the last 30 years, the forces of autocracy have revived all across the globe. Its hallmarks are familiar ones: contempt for the rule of law, contempt for democratic freedom, contempt for the truth itself. Today, Russia has strangled democracy, has sought to do so elsewhere, not only in its homeland. Under false claims of ethnic solidarity, it has invalidated neighboring nations. Putin has the gall to say he's denazifying Ukraine. It's a lie. It's just cynical. He knows that. And it's also obscene. President Zelensky was democratically elected. He's Jewish. His father's family was wiped out in the Nazi Holocaust. And Putin has the audacity, like all our autocrats before him, to believe that might will make right. My own country, a former president named Abraham Lincoln, voiced the opposing spirit to save our union in the midst of a civil war. He said, "Let us have faith that right makes might. Right makes might." Today, let us have that faith again. Let us resolve to put the strength of democracies into action to thwart the designs of autocracy. Let us remember that the test of this moment is the test of all time. Kremlin wants to portray NATO enlargement as an imperial project aimed at destabilizing Russia. Nothing is further from the truth. NATO is a defensive alliance. It has never sought the demise of Russia. In the lead up to the current crisis, the United States and NATO worked for months to engage Russia to avert war. I met with them in person, talked to them many times on the phone. Time and again, we offered real diplomacy and concrete proposals to strengthen European security, enhance transparency, build confidence on all sides. But Putin and Russia met each of the proposals with disinterested in any negotiation, with lies and ultimatums. Russia was bent on violence from the start. I know not all of you believed me and us when we kept saying they are going to cross the border, they are going to attack. Repeatedly, he asserted we had no interest in war, guaranteed he would not move. Repeatedly saying he would not invade Ukraine. Repeatedly saying Russian troops along the border were there for training, all 180,000 of them. There's simply no justification or provocation for Russia's choice of war. It's an example of one of the oldest human impulses, using brute force and disinformation to satisfy a craving for absolute power and control. It's nothing less than a direct challenge to the rule-based international order established since the end of World War II. And it threatens to return to decades of war that ravaged Europe before the international rule-based order was put in place. We cannot go back to that. We cannot. The gravity of the threat is why the response of the West has been so swift and so powerful and so unified, unprecedented and overwhelming. Swift and punishing cost are the only things that are going to get Russia to change its course. Within days of his invasion, the West has moved jointly with sanctions to damage Russia's economy. Russia's central bank is now blocked from global financial system, denying Kremlin's access to the war fund that's stashed around the globe. We've aimed at the heart of Russia's economy by stopping the imports of Russian energy to the United States. To date, the United States has sanctioned 140 Russian oligarchs and their family members, seizing their ill-begotten gains, their yachts, their luxury apartments, their mansions. We've sanctioned more than 400 Russian government officials, including key architects of this war. These officials and oligarchs have reaped enormous benefit from the corruption connected to the Kremlin. And now they have to share in the pain. The private sector is acting as well. Over 400 private multinational companies have pulled out of doing business in Russia, left Russia completely, from oil companies to McDonald's. As a result of these unprecedented sanctions, the ruble almost is immediately reduced to rubble. The Russian economy, that's true, by the way, takes about 200 rubles to equal $1. The economy is on track to be cut in half in the coming years. It was ranked, Russia's economy was ranked the 11th biggest economy in the world before this invasion. It will soon not even rank among the top 20 in the world. Taken together, these economic sanctions are a new kind of economic statecraft with the power to inflict damage that rivals military might. These international sanctions are sapping Russian strength, its ability to replenish its military, and its ability to project power. And it is Putin, it is Vladimir Putin who is to blame, period. At the same time, alongside these economic sanctions, the Western world has come together to provide for the people of Ukraine with incredible levels of military, economic, humanitarian assistance. In the years before the invasion, we, America, had sent over $650 million before they crossed the border in weapons to Ukraine, including anti-air and anti-armor equipment. Since the invasion, America has committed another $1.35 billion in weapons and ammunition. And thanks to the courage and bravery of the Ukrainian people, the equipment we've sent and our colleagues have sent have been used to devastating effect to defend Ukrainian land and airspace. Our allies and partners have stepped up as well. But as I've made clear, American forces are in Europe, not in Europe, to engage in conflict with Russian forces. American forces are here to defend NATO allies. Yesterday I met with the troops that are serving alongside our Polish allies to bolster NATO's frontline defenses. The reason we want to make clear is their movement on Ukraine. Don't even think about moving on one single inch of NATO territory. We have sacred obligation. We have a sacred obligation under Article 5 to defend each and every inch of NATO territory with the full force of our collective power. And earlier today, I visited your national stadium, where thousands of Ukrainian refugees are now trying to answer the toughest questions a human can ask. My God, what's going to happen to me? What's going to happen to my family? I saw tears in many of the mothers' eyes as I embraced them. They're young children, not sure whether to smile or cry. One little girl said, "Mr. President," she spoke a little English, "my brother and my daddy, are they going to be okay? Will I see them again?" Not their husbands, their fathers. In many cases, their brothers and sisters who stayed back to fight for their country. I didn't have to speak the language or understand the language, feel the emotion in their eyes, where they gripped my hand. Little kids hung onto my leg, praying, the desperate hope all this is temporary. Apprehension that they may be perhaps forever away from their homes. Almost a debilitating sadness. This is happening all over again. But I was also struck by the generosity of the people of Warsaw, for that matter, all the Polish people, the depths of their compassion, their willingness to reach out, opening their hearts. Say to the mayor and the premier, they're opening their hearts and their homes simply to help. I also want to thank my friend, the great American chef, Jose Andres, and his team for help feeding those who are yearning to be free. But helping these refugees is not something Poland or any other nation should carry alone. All the world democracies have a responsibility to help, all of them. The people of Ukraine can count on the United States to meet its responsibility. Announced 2 days ago, we will welcome 100,000 Ukrainian refugees. We already have 8,000 a week coming to the United States of other nationalities. We'll provide nearly $300 million in humanitarian assistance, providing tens of thousands of tons of food, water, medicine, and other basic supplies. In Brussels, I announced the United States is prepared to provide more than $1 billion in additional humanitarian aid. The World Food Program told us that despite significant obstacles, at least some relief is getting to major cities in Ukraine, but not Metropole. No, excuse me, not Mariupol, because Russian forces are blocking relief supplies. But we'll not cease our efforts to get humanitarian relief wherever it is needed in Ukraine for the people who have made it out of Ukraine. Notwithstanding the brutality of Vladimir Putin, let there be no doubt, this war has already been a strategic failure for Russia, already. Having lost children myself, I know that's no solace to the people who lost family. He, Putin, thought Ukrainians would roll over and not fight. Not much of a student of history. Instead, Russian forces have met their match with brave and stiff Ukrainian resistance. Rather than breaking Ukrainian resolve, Russia's brutal tactics have strengthened the resolve. Rather than driving NATO apart, the West is now stronger and more united than it has ever been. Russia wanted less of a NATO presence on his border, but now he has a stronger presence, a larger presence, with over 100,000 American troops here, along with all the other members of NATO. In fact, Russia has managed to cause something I'm sure he never intended. The democracies of the world are revitalized with purpose and unity found in months that we'd once taken years to accomplish. It's not only Russia's actions in Ukraine that are reminding us of democracy's blessing. It's our own country, his own country, the Kremlin. It's jailing protesters. 200,000 people have allegedly already left. There's a brain drain leaving Russia, shutting down independent news. State media is all propaganda, blocking the image of civilian targets, mass graves, starvation tactics, the Russian forces in Ukraine. Is there any wonder, as I said, that 200,000 Russians have already left their country in 1 month? Remarkable brain drain in such a short period of time. Which brings me to my message to the Russian people. I've worked with Russian leaders for decades, sat across the negotiating table going all the way back to Soviet Premier Alexei Kosygin, talk arms control at the height of the Cold War. I've always spoken directly and honestly to you, the Russian people. Let me say this, if you're able to listen. You, the Russian people, are not our enemy. I refuse to believe that you welcome the killing of innocent children and grandparents, or that you accept hospitals, schools, maternity wards, and for God's sake, being pummeled with Russian missiles and bombs, or cities being surrounded so that civilians cannot flee, supplies cut off, and attempting to starve Ukrainians into submission. Millions of families are being driven from their homes, including half of all Ukraine's children. These are not the actions of a great nation. Of all people, you, the Russian people, as well as all people across Europe, still have the memory of being in a similar situation in the late 30s and 40s. Situation in World War II. Still fresh in the minds of many grandparents in the region. Whatever your generation experienced, whether it experienced the siege of Leningrad or heard about it from your parents and grandparents, train stations overflowing with terrified families fleeing their homes, nights sheltering in basements and cellars, mornings sitting through the rubble in your homes. These are not memories of the past, not anymore. It is exactly what the Russian army doing in Ukraine right now. March 26, 2022, just days before we're at the 21st, you were a 21st century nation. Hopes and dreams people all over the world have for themselves and their families. Now, Vladimir Putin's aggression have cut you, the Russian people, off from the rest of the world. It's taking Russia back to the 19th century. This is not who you are. This is not the future you deserve for your families and your children. Telling you the truth, this war is not worthy of you, the Russian people. Putin can and must end this war. The American people will stand with you, and the brave citizens of Ukraine who want peace. My message to the rest of Europe, this new battle for freedom has already made a few things crystal clear. First, Europe must end its dependence on Russian fossil fuels. We, the United States, will help. That's why just yesterday in Brussels, I announced the plan with the President of the European Commission to get Europe through the immediate energy crisis. Over the long term, as a matter of economic security and national security for the survivability of the planet, we all need to move as quickly as possible to clean, renewable energy. And we'll work together to help get that done, so that the days of any nation being subject to the whims of a tyrant for its energy needs are over. They must end. They must end. Second, we have to fight the corruption coming from the Kremlin to give the Russian people a fair chance. Finally, most urgently, we maintain absolute unity. We must among the world's democracies. It's not enough to speak with rhetorical flourish of ennobling words of democracy, of freedom, equality, and liberty. All of us, including here in Poland, must do the hard work of democracy each and every day. My country as well. That's why I came to Europe again this week with a clear and determined message for NATO, for the G7, for the European Union, all freedom-loving nations. We must commit now to be in this fight for the long haul. We must remain unified today and tomorrow and the day after, and for the years and decades to come. It will not be easy. There will be cost, but it's a price we have to pay, because the darkness that drives autocracy is ultimately no match for the flame of liberty that lights the souls of free people everywhere. Time and again, history shows that it's from the darkest moments that the greatest progress follows. And history shows this is the task of our time, the task of this generation. Let's remember the hammer blow that brought down the Berlin Wall. The might that lifted the Iron Curtain were not the words of a single leader. It was the people of Europe who for decades fought to free themselves. Their sheer bravery opened the border between Austria and Hungary for the pan-European picnic. They joined hands for the Baltic Way. They stood for solidarity here in Poland. And together, it was an unmistakable and undeniable force of the people that the Soviet Union could not withstand. And we're seeing it once again today with the brave Ukrainian people showing that their power of many is greater than the will of any one dictator. So in this hour, let the words of Pope John Paul burn as brightly today. Never, ever give up hope. Never doubt. Never tire. Never become discouraged. Be not afraid. A dictator bent on rebuilding an empire will never erase a people's love for liberty. Brutality will never grind down their will to be free. Ukraine will never be a victory for Russia, where free people refused to live in a world of hopelessness and darkness. We will have a different future, a brighter future, rooted in democracy and principles, hope and light, of decency and dignity, of freedom and possibilities. For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power. God bless you all, and may God defend our freedom, and may God protect our troops. Thank you for your patience. Thank you. Thank you.
Patience is the right word.
That was President of the United States, Joe Biden, speaking in the Polish capital of Warsaw. He confirmed his solidarity with Ukraine and slammed Vladimir Putin's belief that might makes right. Let's see what my panel make of this. I'm joined by co-founder of Conservatives Against Racism, Albi Amunkoda, and former Labour advisor Scarlett Maguire. Right, well, that's Joe Biden with his speech. I actually thought he was quite eloquent, to be honest with you, and there were some things that he said that I was quite impressed with, if I'm honest. But Albi, what was your view and your thoughts?
Yes, I think he was eloquent, and it was certainly a nice speech, but I'm unsure really what he said. And he was talking about a lot of these well-trodden arguments about liberty versus oppression and freedom, 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 and of course everyone in the Western world will support that. But in terms of actual concrete steps that the Western world can take to counter what's going on in Ukraine, he just reeled through what we've already done, and it doesn't seem to have really stopped Russia that much. So I'm not sure about this speech, and I think actually that the most effective person I've actually seen speak out and maybe be more convincing to the Russian people, perhaps, was actually a speech that Arnold Schwarzenegger did. It was fantastic.
Yeah.
And I think
video.
he should have taken some notes from Arnold Schwarzenegger, in my opinion.
Well, he did say that since the start that the Americans have given $640 million, and then he made a commitment promising a further $1.35 billion. And he also said that, I thought that his quote about saying that don't even think about encroaching on one step of NATO territory, and then basically claiming that we will retaliate with the full force of our collective power. I think that this speech was a way of showing that we are united. It was a show of strength of Vladimir Putin, but I'm not sure with the character that Vladimir Putin has whether that will go down well. But Scarlett, you're...
No, I think about the one step. It has been said, reiterated over and over again, and I think it's fine, and I think he had to say it, but we still have no idea, and as does Vladimir Putin, quite what he means. I think it was quite interesting that he was right, is that Vladimir Putin thought he would have a NATO all over the place, and actually it's united NATO. I do think there's a real problem with this culture thing about saying, you know, it's liberty against dictatorship. I mean, if we look at Hungary, which is pretty close to being a dictatorship, doesn't have free media, doesn't have anything. I mean, actually, what it's about is saying we are not having a country invaded by anybody. It doesn't matter who you are, what you are. You don't walk into another country and say this is ours. And I just think that you don't wrap it in culture war. You say that's why we're here. We will protect the little people, and it's great. Yeah, it was a good speech, but it didn't take us any further.
Well, I don't know. I mean, he's made a point, hasn't he? He's made a point that, and I actually tend to slightly disagree with you when you say that there isn't a sort of culture war, because I think it is. He talked about autocracy and democracy, and if you look at it, the only reason, actually, in my view, why he's managed to be as successful as he is currently in the eyes of the Russian people is because of the propaganda machine that is behind what he is doing. And I suspect that if the truth, or they were to view it from our eyes, they may well see a very different picture and might not be prepared to pitch up behind it. Yes, I do agree. He did talk about what we have, what we've done so far. But what else could he say?
Well, I think actually another interesting thing he said, which is why this war is different from ones before, is he said this isn't about the Russian people, this is about Vladimir Putin. And actually, I think that's very, very important. And I think that's why you were right about Arnold Schwarzenegger, is that people are trying to get through to Russia. Because actually, the reason the Soviet Union fell, one of the big reasons, was Afghanistan, was because there was internal rebellion about people being sent to Afghanistan. So the more people can say to the Russians, do you really know what you're doing, the better.
So, so are you retracting on that? Then you're not saying it's a culture war. You're saying that the demonstration is.
No, what I'm saying is, I just think, yes, you're right about the autocracy stuff, but what is I think the culture war isn't as important as we just don't let this happen. Right, is we do not let another country, a big bullying country, walk into Ukraine. And it's and to go on about we've got liberty and we've got that. I mean, you know, we were going to, I don't know if we're still going to talk about the cancel culture. I was just looking at all the books that have been banned in the States. I mean, you know, there are a lot of problems there. And I just think that this is straightforward. A bullying large country with a terrible dictator has gone into a smaller country and said, this is ours. And that's what it's about, right? It's not about democracy.
I tend to disagree with you on that. I think the success or failure of Vladimir Putin is based around whether the Russian people continue to back him and continue to go behind him. And the reason right now, I suspect that a lot of them are, is because there's a lot of the propaganda they're hearing. And I believe that the only reason that has been allowed to prevail is for the sheer fact that it is an autocracy and that they have not been... we talked about freedom of speech and having that freedom to express yourself and having the freedom of other information.
I think just to zoom in on the point about him saying to Russia, don't step 1 foot into NATO territory, I think what I maybe would have liked to have heard from Biden and maybe NATO more broadly is actually a commitment for all NATO states to meet that 2% GDP defence spending commitments, because not all nations do. Of course, we've seen Germany increase their military spending massively, and they're going to meet that commitment for the first time. But I think if we're going to say don't step foot in a NATO territory, it would be good if all the territories spent enough on defence for their country.
But I think if you were to then bring that into the argument, that might show a lack of unity, and it might create that scenario where Vladimir Putin, as he pointed out, Joe Biden has pointed out, that what Vladimir Putin failed to acknowledge was that what his war would do would be to unite all NATO, all of us together, and also he pointed out that this was not really the objective of Vladimir Putin, as he thought that this would weaken us. So I think talking about the 2% would have been something that might be divisive.
But I guess my point would be, what a strong message would it have been if NATO said we are all going to meet our commitments of military defence funding, and that was announced in that speech, so that it really put some punch behind that statement about don't step foot into NATO territory.
Well, I think that would distract. I mean, I hear you, but I think that would distract from the current situation we're in. The last thing we want to be doing is haggling about money at this point. Really, as Scarlett said, it's about defending and protecting and not allowing mass slaughter on that scale, and also warning Vladimir Putin of the limits where they are, but not specifically drawing any red lines, because you know that if we don't stick to that, then we start to look somewhat weak. But some of the points he made about international sanctions and the strangling of Russia's wealth, I think he made some good points there. And, you know, he talked about aiming at the heart of Russia's economy and sanctioning all the oligarchs. And then he even mentioned the ruble, which I thought it was interesting, the ruble to rubble type thing, which is true, isn't it? It has brought down the value of the ruble, and whether the Russian people will tolerate that. And I like the fact that he emphasised this, and actually he was speaking to the Russian people there, wasn't he? He was talking to the Russian people.
He was hoping to be heard by the Russian people,
right.
Certainly. I mean, there was no question about that. And actually, of course, he's completely right. I mean, life in Russia has gone back to the days of the Soviet Union, when it was a terrible currency. There were queues for everything. Nothing was available.
I visited it then. I went to the Soviet Union when it was the Soviet Union. I think I was about 17 there. We went on Aeroflot, and you know, I tasted Russian vodka as well. I was just 17, so it was fine. And it was an interesting place. We queued. I bought a poster and I had to queue up, first of all, to choose the poster. Then you had to queue up again to do something else. Then you had to queue up to pay for it. So there were 3 queues and everyone queued in silence. And I'm glad, in the sense that he brought it back to that, to remind the Russian people, because he's ultimately talking to them, that is that what you want to live in, because that's where you're going.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So marks out of 10 for Joe Biden's speech, if you were to give them to him, because, you know, I didn't really think that much of him. But this hasn't changed my view that, you know, I didn't think that he was compos mentis in many areas. But in terms of him getting a message across, I think he actually did it. So what mark would you give him, Albie?
I'd give him a solid 6 out of 10. I think it was a nice speech. It hit some of the right notes, but in terms of actual actions, I thought it lacked a little bit there, personally.
And how do you think Vladimir Putin would respond, very briefly? Because
I'm not sure Vladimir Putin will be quaking in his boots after listening to that speech, put it that way.
Do you think, Scott?
Yeah, no, I absolutely. I mean, I think Vladimir Putin will say, nothing new, no more threats. I'd give him 7 out of 10.
But you know how annoyed he was, though, when he was called a war criminal. He wasn't happy, apparently. That's what we hear, that he wasn't happy with that. But that's, again, we don't know for sure, do we? Well, let's have a look, because a lot of people have been getting in touch as well with us. Keep your thoughts on this coming up. So give us your thoughts on it. Just email us right now. We'll try and get some of your views on there. So, yes, did you say your mark out of 10? Mark out of 10?
7.
7.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was a good, solid speech. It could have been delivered better. I mean, it was quite odd, is that sometimes, I mean, it did have light and shade, but it was just sort of great big paragraphs of light and shade.
There was one bit where he said his American chef, Quasi Andrews, for helping people. I don't know whether he actually meant that he helped them cook food for people. I was confused at that bit. Did he mean chief or chef, or did I hear it wrong? Did you hear that bit?
I didn't hear that bit, but just to come in on the point about him being upset about being called a war criminal, of course,
Putin, yeah.
Biden called Putin a liar in his speech.
Well, he did, yes.
I think that line will probably cut through to Putin, and Putin won't be very happy about that. So I think that was probably a good line to take.
Yeah. He was quite specific, wasn't he? Well, keep your emails coming. We want to hear your view on this, because he was speaking fairly eloquently for Joe Biden. Let's take a quick look at what you've been saying about the speech. Jeff says, he said what needed to be said. Quite impressed, about time. Yeah. Sior says, just watching Biden in Poland, nowhere near good enough. He doesn't think it's good enough. Yeah, well, I mean, look, it's good that we heard from him, and I do agree that this needed to be said. and I'm glad that he sort of came across with strength as well. Now, I'll have a brief look, because today's show we've been asking which country do you think is the biggest threat to UK security? And according to our Twitter poll, 3% of you said North Korea, 5% of you said Iran, 31% say Russia, and 61% say China. So not much has changed in that. Well, that's interesting, isn't it, that they feel that China is the most worrying of the countries in terms of our security.
I think it's absolutely fascinating when you've got Russia threatening us with nuclear weapons, and still it's China that's the bigger threat.
Yeah, Albie.
Yes, I do think I think I agree with you on that, Scarlett. But there is definitely a lot of concern at the moment going on with China, because a lot of their operations seem to be quite subterranean, and I think that's what worries people. We can see what Russia are doing. We can't see what China are doing.
Well, can we see what Russia are doing? They're quite good at this whole subterfuge type thing. Even now with the war, we don't know what they're invading and where they're going. Can we?
Well, I think one of the things we can see about Russia is their military intelligence. Either their military intelligence was pretty terrible, or nobody dared tell Vladimir Putin. So actually, we've seen a much weaker Russia than we would have done at the beginning of the year.
Wow. Well, it's been a very interesting show for me, in particular, listening to Joe Biden speak for longer than, 20 seconds. I was really impressed. And actually, to be fair to him, I think he did say what needed to be said. I'm going to say thank you so much to my panellists, Scarlett Maguire and, of course, Albie Amonkona, for joining me today. And a big thank you to you at home for your company. I'll be back tomorrow at 4. Make sure you tune in, find out more on the app. Coming up next is Saturday Selection.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking dry with clear skies for many, though cloudier for the Northern Isles. Let's take a look at the details. It's going to be fine end to the day in the southwest of England. The cloudless skies will remain, meaning it will turn chilly once the sun sets. The evening is looking similar across the southeast and the London area. Tomorrow is going to be cloudier and cooler than of late, though. There may be a little cloud across